please stop installing Arch for the AUR in 2026. Yes, the AUR is great if you are running Arch, but it is not something that alone makes Arch a distribution worth switching to. I cannot count the amount of times I've cringed hard when I've read somebody talking about how they want to switch to another distro, but the AUR is just holding them on Arch. But in reality, the AUR isn't that special of a feature. In 2026, just about everything you would need in the AUR has other ways you can get it on most Linux distributions. First off, if you don't know what the AUR is, this is the Arch user repository. So people love it because you can find almost any application you can think of on the AUR. That's just a random one. And let's go to the most popular packages. So a lot of people use it to install things like other desktop environments, maybe proprietary apps that cannot be included in the official repo, other web browsers like Chrome, Helium, Brave, LibreWolf, Zen browser, even the X Libre server, Spotify, just a lot of common applications people on Arch are using the AUR for. And the way it works, if we go to one of these packages here, is all these AUR packages have a package build file. And so your AUR helper will find the download for the package, verify the download, and then actually build a package that it can then install onto your system. Now, one of the drawbacks of the AUR is notice that a lot of these packages have like -bin at the end, things like that. And that's because for a lot of the open source stuff, if it isn't a -bin, because that just grabs a binary, a lot of these AUR packages that do not have a -bin are actually building the package from source. So sometimes a AUR installation can take forever. But that said, people love it because it makes it easy to install pretty much any package you can think of on Arch, even if it's not in the official Arch repos. That said, you do have to trust the maintainer to not only not provide you a package build that does something malicious, but also that they're actually going to maintain and keep the package you're using up to date. Although most of the alternatives I'm about to talk to actually have that same problem anyway, so that isn't a problem just with the AUR. But people treat this like it's the greatest Linux feature of all time and it's the reason you should be using Arch. I'm not trying to say you shouldn't use Arch here. It's a great distribution platform. You can kind of build whatever you want out of a very bleeding edge package base and you have a lot of control over your system. But if you don't want that, you don't need to install Arch just so you can get access to the AUR. There's a lot of other reasons to use other distributions, and the AUR shouldn't be what's holding you back from trying all these other distributions out and making you have to stay on Arch. So just for the love of God, stop installing Arch just for the AUR, and let's just go over some of the other solutions you can use instead of the AUR. First off, we have all the universal package managers. We're talking Flatpak and AppImage and I guess Snap. Now, back when I was using Arch, I guess you could say before I fell off now that I'm using Atomic Boosie distributions, I would use the AUR to install apps like Zoom for online classes back during the pandemic, apps like Spotify and VS Code. I would use the AUR to install basically any proprietary app that Arch could not package. And most of the apps I would use the AUR for, because they're proprietary apps, they would usually offer a deb package and an RPM package if you're lucky. So if I was on a Ubuntu based distro, I would normally just go with a .deb anyway. I was basically just installing it from the AUR because I was on Arch. But nowadays, pretty much all of the proprietary applications that I may need, like I don't use Spotify anymore, but Spotify is a huge example. Boom, that's available on FlatHub. You're not gonna have any container issues with Spotify. I know about the container issues. I have a whole video on that already. Just the reality here is pretty much all of the top applications that aren't like system level are going to have a Flatpak, Snap, or AppImage available, and for that use case, that is just the easy solution that you can use on any distro that isn't Arch. The only apps you're really going to find on the AUR that are not available on Flatpak, Snap, or AppImage are going to be really obscure apps or things that cannot be in a Flatpak, like system drivers, for example. Now, if for some reason the app you want isn't covered by Flatpak, Snap, and AppImage, there's also Nix packages. Fun fact, there are more Nix packages than there are packages on the AUR, so this is actually an even bigger repository. Another misconception, you don't have to be running NixOS to use Nix packages. The Nix package manager actually supports both Linux and Mac OS, and it even supports things like atomic program upgrades and rollbacks and things like that. Now, some of the problems with it is it does have a very steep learning curve. For the most part, it's not as easy as just Flatpak installing a package or even using the AUR. And it also isn't going to be using your system dependencies, which is a good thing in terms of compatibility, but it is going to be a bad thing in terms of disk storage, because there may be a lot of duplicated dependencies that can cause a lot of storage use. But other than that, this is another very good option to look into for some of the packages you may need that your distro cannot provide. And then finally, another thing I would like to just give a shout out to is Linux Brew. This isn't going to be something you would want to use to replace the AUR fully, but it is good for immutable file systems and atomic distros, because one, it doesn't require sudo and it installs to a single directory, which is usually either your home directory or a Linux Brew user directory that gets created, but you're only going to typically use this to get CLI apps. That said, many distros actually have things that are similar to the AUR for their distribution. A classic example of this is PPAs. So this is going to be, you basically add a repository somebody created with whatever apps they want, things like that, and it's going to integrate perfectly with apt. So it actually has better system integration than the AUR does on Arch, because on Arch you're going to need to be using a separate AUR helper to handle things like updates, and then you end up running a separate AUR updater alongside like your Pacman updates. But this is just going to update with the rest of your system through the app package manager. PPAs are all hosted on canonical servers, so on the community side, if you want to build a package, you kind of just build the package and you don't have to worry about hosting a repository. But you do have risks of Frankenstein, Frankendebian, where if somebody puts a package on a PPA that isn't compatible with other packages on Ubuntu, it can break your system. System upgrades can be harder if you have PPAs on your system, and sometimes people like to patch certain libraries, which can also break stuff. And then another problem is it isn't very auditable. The AUR, you can read the package build file and make sure it's not doing anything weird. In fact, you're encouraged to do that, although I know full well you aren't doing that. Whereas this, you just have a dev file. It's harder to actually audit what you're getting. Finally, it is really hard to actually find PPAs of things you want, because if we go to Launchpad right here, which is where Canonical actually hosts PPAs, you have a little search bar right here. So if you know exactly what PPA you're looking for, you can search for it here. But if you're trying to like discover new software, the AUR right here is going to give you a nice little dashboard that shows all AUR packages based on popularity. Whereas this, I guess you can do a blank search and it will give you a list of PPAs. But just good luck trying to discover applications through PPAs, because typically you would go in and try and install something and it would give you a little guide to enable the PPA and install it. It's also worth noting PPAs pretty much only work on Ubuntu too. They can work on Debian, but they're unsupported and can break stuff. Next up, we have Fedora Kopar. So this is another one that gives you pre-compiled packages, and it integrates with the DNF package manager the same way PPAs do with apps. Additionally, it's hosted on Fedora servers. But just because it's made by Fedora doesn't mean it can't build packages for other distros. As you can see, it supports, we have Alma right here, Amazon Linux, CentOS Stream. You can do custom RPMs, all the Fedoras, Magia, OpenEOR, OpenSUSE Leap and Tumbleweed, and RHEL. Pretty much supports any RPM distro. I use it to maintain the package base for StillOS. Yes, we are a Atomic distro, but we use packages behind the scene to help build out the system. Unlike PPAs, it's actually pretty easy to discover packages on here. So right here we have our recent projects, which shows all of the new Kopar repos being made, and you can pretty easily find applications here. And just on this random app right here, if I go to one of the packages that this repo provides, you can read what the spec file does and audit that, and you can actually read what Fedora's build system actually ended up doing. So it's a lot more auditable than PPAs are. It's still not as auditable as a AUR packages, because the AUR package, you get the make file locally, you usually read it while you're installing it, and then you watch it build on your system. Whereas this, you have to go onto the website and look at the infrastructure to see what's going on, but still a benefit over PPAs. You still have the risk of getting a Franken Fedora installation where packages may not be compatible and things may break, especially if there's like another patch package in a repository. The update problem that PPAs have, where when you're updating the distribution release, it doesn't seem to be as bad with Kopar repos for me, because it will automatically rebuild the package for a new version of Fedora when it comes out. But to me, this is just like a better version of the PPA systems that you can use on Fedora and enterprise Linux distros. and OpenSUSE. And yeah, let's move on to OBS, the Open Build Service. So this is more kind of a back-end infrastructure thing compared to Copar and PPAs. But this is a system that actually lets you build packages for Deb, RPM, Arch packages, even app images. And so this is a good place to find repositories here, mainly for distributions like OpenSUSE and SUSE Enterprise Linux. But also, if you are an app developer and you want an easy way to create a RPM, a Deb package, an app image, just all the packages with one system, this is a great thing to look into. That said, it does have a little bit of a learning curve to make a package compared to Copar, where you just make an RPM spec file, and the AUR, where you just make a package build. I cannot speak for PPAs. I've never actually made a PPA, but everything else I've covered so far, I have made a package with. And then the other problem is similar to PPAs. It is very hard to actually find repositories on here. You go to all projects, you set it to not only show home projects, and then you're basically just in alphabetical order, and you kind of have to look through and see if there's an app you're interested. Just the discovery isn't very good. You do get a search too, but it's kind of like PPAs, where it's not really made for discovering things. That said, this is another option you can use to find packages if you need a package that isn't in your distribution's repo. By the way, if you are running one of these distributions and you find a package that isn't in your distro's repository or in one of these instances, go in and maintain the package yourself. If you have some experience just scripting, it's not too difficult to do, and then pretty much all you have to do is keep up with new releases of the project, which if it's a project you really care about, you might be doing anyway, and then just update the package when it comes out. It's a great way to contribute to your favorite open source projects here. Now, next up, I've never used this, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but there's also the Nix user repositories in case Nix packages were not enough for you. I'm just pointing out something that exists. I don't have much experience with it, but if you do not want to use one of these repo systems, you still have other options like just compile from source. Now, I am trolling a little bit. You're not going to be getting updates that are automatic with the source compiling. Many times you can't do this for proprietary applications, and it's just a pain in the ass to do, but this still exists as an option if you really have to install something that you just cannot find anywhere else. But I got one more option for you, and that is DistroBox. So this lets you run a container of any other Linux distribution on the distribution you're running. So in this screenshot, I have Arch on Ubuntu, and you can actually install packages for other distros in this, and you can even integrate both CLI and graphical applications from your DistroBox container actually into your system. So I'm using this to run DaVinci Resolve, which is notoriously a very difficult program to install on Linux, and I will be doing a dedicated video on that. But segue to the outro, I'm actually going to end the video here. If you want to learn more about DistroBox, you can go check the video I did last week, which gives a quick overview of DistroBox, teaches you how to use it, and shows you how powerful it is. That said, thank you for watching this video. I hope to see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below. I'll see you guys in the next one, and have a great evening.